Welcome to this latest edition of the Real Deal Podcast, episode 943. As I discuss another great weekend of NFL football, week 19, a super wild card weekend. And I just want to say, I don't think I owe the NFL an apology. I'm not going to go that far. But when they decided to add one team to the playoffs to go from 6 to 7 a couple of years ago, I was all against it. I said, you don't have that many good teams as it is. Somebody's going to make the playoffs that clearly doesn't deserve to make the playoffs, and it's going to make for some bad football. A weekend like this completely dispels all of that. Because a weekend like this, because no longer the NFL is so spread out in terms of parity that, you could have a team that you don't think was any good or deserved to make it, and they can end up beating a team that at one time was 10-1. Or they can end up beating a team that was considered to be a Super Bowl favorite by a zillion points. So, I was dead wrong about that from that standpoint. The Super Wild Card weekend is here. It's not going anywhere, by the way. We all know that's not going anywhere. But I was into the games this weekend, especially with, you want to call it a snowstorm. I mean, depending on where you were at, DMV, not so much. Buffalo got, ravaged. But, what's new? Different year, same results. That is the title of this podcast. Themes, Doomsday in Dallas. And they may be young, but they're ready. We will flush out a bunch of young quarterbacks stepping up in a major way. But first, we got to get to the dessert. Sometimes, I eat the dinner for the dessert. But this is where all the thoughts. No, we'll begin. You know what? I'm gonna switch it up. We'll go back to all the thoughts. We normally start off with all the thoughts, but I'm changing it up this episode.
I thought that we were aligned in great shape, and it didn't happen for us. And it's as fresh on me right now as it is on anybody else. But I won't get into any of the addressing of any aspects of it, any part of it, from the coaching to the players to what's around the corner.
Down goes Dallas. As anybody who knows me that has known me for any amount of time, you would know that I'm a Commanders fan, and the test to my core, the Dallas Cowboys. Now, growing up, I respected the Cowboys, Jimmy Johnson, Jerry Jones firing Tom Landry, winning three Super Bowls in 4 years. I respected them. Deion Sanders, you can't deny greatness. They were a great team in the 90s. I hated the 49ers, so I actually was rooting for them to beat the 49ers, if you want to believe that. That wouldn't happen today, of course. If they ever played the 49ers, I'll always root for the 49ers beat the Cowboys. But, I hated the 49ers. The 49ers were the standard in the 80s, and they, I hated them, so I wanted somebody to beat them. I can't think of a more it was hard for me to contain myself watching this game and how it unfolded. I didn't expect. Now listen, I saw something earlier in the week when the line was only like 7. My spidey senses kind of went off and thinking to myself, is this game going to be closer than what I expected? I fully expected Dallas to win this game. Green Bay, was playing well coming into the playoffs. I know Jordan Love was playing great coming into the playoffs and was playing, like a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback. And we know he has a chance to have a big future. But I didn't expect, there was no way I expected Green Bay to win this game, let alone do what they did. But when that line was only 7, I said to myself, maybe this thing could get interesting. Maybe. I doubt it, but maybe. As this game is unfolding, I just, I'm watching it with my mom, and we are both just in shock. I'm looking at receivers from Green Bay just run wide open, where you basically like, it seemed like it was a 7-on-7 drill at times. And a loss like this, it goes beyond just, hey, they were able to run Aaron Jones. Hey, Dak Prescott, the moment was too big for him. Hey, Dallas choked up, and they did choke. The game was too big for them as a team. A loss like this is a culture loss. This is a loss of culture. When you see losses like this, like you saw this in the playoffs, either last year or a couple years ago, when Dallas destroyed Phoenix in that Game 7. I think it was last year, or the year before last. I think it was the year before last, the 22 playoffs, where Phoenix got just ran through by Dallas on their own floor in the Game 7 by like 30 points. I think it was 123 to 90. Yeah, by 33 points. And it was like, yo, there's something more than just Luka's the best player on the floor. Like, no, this doesn't. This is a culture. This is something internal. Something internally wrong is there's something internally wrong with that organization. That's not right. And everything came out that happened with Phoenix, DeAndre Ayton, Chris Paul, that whole bit. We don't have to relitigate that. But that's how I look at this game with Dallas. Dallas for years has been kind of like a organized toxic culture from the standpoint of you have an owner who wants all the credit. You have an owner who cannot get out of his own way. You have an owner who, is who he is. We know what Jerry Jones is. And that comes out in moments like these when things get tight, or when the game's online, or when there are pressure moments. There's a reason why Dallas struggled in close games for the most part this year. And when they won for the most part, it was during blowouts. There's a reason why Dallas couldn't beat good teams this year. Okay? That is culture. And a toxic or a broken culture, it stands out when the pressure's on. That team, Dallas, was as tight. They were as tight as a drum. And how you know the culture is broken? You see Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb, right? CeeDee Lamb was, I believe, the most targeted or second most targeted receiver in football this year. He had 135 catches. 135 catches. Dak Prescott this year led the league in touchdown passes, second team All-Pro, will probably finish top 3 in the MVP race. How is it that they are not on the same page? Like, make that make sense. How is it? How? Dak Prescott didn't miss. I don't believe Dak Prescott missed any games this year. That's broken culture. Like when you see some of the stuff you saw with the defensive assignments, missed assignments, and with the secondary, that's when a culture is broken. Because you don't know when your culture is broken and adversity hits, you're down 14-0. You don't know how to reel it in. Like 14-0 in today's NFL, that's nothing. If you're a big time offensive team, this year Dallas is one of the top offensive teams in football. They average close to 30 points a game. Like 14-0 on your home field, okay, we're good. Especially when we're getting the ball back in the second half to begin the second half. Oh, no, that's nothing. Then 14-0 became, before you knew it, 27-0. So you saw a pure example. And we'll talk about another NFC East broken culture later on in the podcast, because they're probably even worse than what Dallas is than where Dallas is right now. In terms of what's going on in Philadelphia. But that was a prime example, what you saw on Sunday afternoon, of a broken culture. There's no way in hell that the Green Bay Packers should have went to AT&T and ran through Dallas like they did. Green Bay is one of the youngest teams in the NFL. They ended the season very like on the hot streak, played well. Of course, we know that their season turned around with that Thanksgiving win to Detroit. Give Green Bay all the credit in the world. LaFleur coached circles around Mike McCarthy. Circles. It wasn't even close. So give them credit. And we know what Jordan Love has a chance to be. Give Green Bay all the credit in the world. I'm not trying to take it away from Green Bay's victory. They deserve to be playing this weekend, this upcoming weekend in the divisional playoff game. But that game was all about Dallas. It was all about Dallas, or of how broken Dallas's culture is. You're talking about a Green Bay team that barely got into the playoffs, a Green Bay team whose receivers are young, but they're not. They don't have a CeeDee Lamb on their team. They don't have a Justin Jefferson, a Jamar Chase. None of those guys. I mean, those guys they have talent. They're NFL players. And maybe one of those guys can eventually be a Pro Bowl player, but they're like, these are not top flight receivers here. We knew Aaron Jones could be a problem. Aaron Jones when healthy, can be a Pro Bowl caliber running back. We knew he could be a problem for Dallas with the running. If Green Bay had any chance, they were going to be able to run the ball. We had to run the ball effectively to beat Dallas, but they even have a chance. But I'm talking receivers, Green Bay receivers, wide open. Like Jordan Love didn't even have to throw receivers open; they were already open. He didn't have to throw them open. And from my perspective, and I thought about this as I'm watching the game. I'm actually working on the podcast. This is how out of hand the game got. That I was actually able to work on my podcast during this game because it got, at one point it was 48-16. This is one of the worst playoff losses I've ever seen in my lifetime, and I would put it up there as one of the worst playoff losses in the 21st century. Like, so I would go. I have a list of them right here. The worst one has to be like Atlanta 2016 28-3 in the Super Bowl. That one, you lose the 28-3 lead in the Super Bowl. There's no way, as great as Tom Brady is, there's no way in the world Atlanta should have remotely had any chance of coming back in that game. So that's the worst. New England 07, 18-1 Super Bowl, losing to a Giant team again. I know the Giants got hot and New England was starting to leak oil down the stretch. Still, there's no way New England should have lost that game. The 06 Chargers, the game where they were clearly, the season where the Chargers were clearly, to me, the best team in football. LaDainian Tomlinson was the best non-quarterback, maybe the best player in football. If put aside the quarterbacks, they blow that game, and to a point to where New England was celebrating a divisional win. That's how, because they knew they had no business winning that game. That was a tough one. 05 Indianapolis. If you remember, they got off to a hot start. I believe they got that might have been the season they got started like 13-0, something like that. They lose at home to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh goes on to win the Super Bowl, but that was a rough one. That Indianapolis team was loaded. Peyton Manning in his prime, all those weapons. That was a rough one. That they had no business, even as good as Pittsburgh was, they still had no business losing that game. Losing that particular game at home. 2011, Green Bay loses to the Giants, 15-1, coming off their Super Bowl year. Defense wasn't good, but Aaron Rodgers was at the top of his game. It, again, lost to a Giant team that got hot in Lambeau Field. That's a rough one. And 21, Green Bay, a couple years ago, losing at home to San Francisco, in which their offense was just anemic. Again, it's aging somewhat better because we know San Francisco has a lot of talent, but that was a season where everything was there for Green Bay to win a championship that year, and they couldn't even win one playoff game. So this game is amongst the worst playoff losses in the 21st century. It is absolutely right there. Considering what was on the line for Dallas, considering a season where there's no dominant team, the NFC is weak. All the power is in the AFC, okay, with Kansas City, Baltimore, and Buffalo. NFC is weak. Once you get past San Francisco, it is. I'm sorry. All due respect to Detroit, the AMC is a joke this year. So you had that going for you if you were Dallas. You had the fact that Philly falls off a cliff. So you were going to get two home playoff games. You had the fact that you had a year where Dak actually had the best year of his career. You waste that. And the bottom line is, Green Bay. Listen, Green Bay had no Pro Bowlers on their team. None. They had no Pro Bowlers. Dallas has 5 All Pros. 5 All Pro players versus a team that had no Pro Bowlers. There's no way that Dallas should have lost this game, let alone get dominated. There's no way they should even have lost this by it is not hyperbole to say that this is the worst loss in the history of their franchise. Maybe not the most devastating. Maybe you want to take one of those Super Bowl losses to Pittsburgh or the Ice Bowl where you lose on the last play, but you're losing to all-time great teams. Like you're losing the Steelers, Steel Curtain. You're losing to Vince Lombardi's Packers. Those are all-time. Those are tough losses, but they're not bad losses in the sense of the opponent and the coaching and who you're facing. These were not Lombardi's Packers that they faced on Sunday. Not even remotely. And, I just listening to all the Dallas stuff, there was a faction of Dallas fans that kind of saw this, were not shocked by this, which tells you what their franchise has been. And there was a faction of their fans. There's a faction of their fans that are still in shock right now. Dallas has lost 3 straight playoff games as 7-point favorites, 13 straight playoff appearances without a conference championship appearance. That is, they're adding to their own record from that standpoint. We know how long it's been since they've been to a conference championship, since they've won the Super Bowl, and they are the most irrelevant team in all the sports. They're relevant when it comes to the business and marketing and branding and attention they receive. They're irrelevant when it comes to being a championship, being in a championship conversation. Let's just call it what it is. Like that is what it is from that standpoint. And this is not going to get better. You can get rid of McCarthy. Cool. You shouldn't have hired him in the first place. Jerry's still there. Okay. You still have Jerry Jones still with his hand on the throttle as owner, general manager, so on and so on. And now, you're probably going to pay Dak, which is going to cause you, and now that roster is going to get thinner because you're going to pay Dak. You're eventually going to pay CeeDee Lamb. You're eventually going to pay Micah Parsons, who was nowhere to be found in that game. Had maybe one holding penalty that was against him. Other than that, is nowhere to be found. And I think he's a great player, but maybe focus more on, less podcasting and more time in the film room for a playoff game. Maybe that. Maybe postpone your podcast to the summertime. Because for the much talking as he did this year in the offseason last year, in the playoff game, you want to start comparing him to some of the all-time greats and all his potential he has with some guys like Lawrence Taylor, Reggie White. Those guys showed up in the playoffs. Period. Those Ray Lewis's, those guys, those great defensive players, they showed up in the playoffs year in and year out. Even when their team lost, they showed up in the playoffs. And now, now the circus begins. Again, I don't expect McCarthy will be back. We'll talk more about the coaching situation. But you're going to hear Belichick's name. I mean, the smart move for Dallas would be, if they do get rid of McCarthy, would be Vrabel. But then, that's not splashy enough for one Jerry Jones. I think if McCarthy does go, he's going to look for the big splash. to try to take some of the sting and some of the attention off this utter embarrassing loss that they had against the Packers. As far as the Packers goes, give the Packers a lot of credit as far as them transitioning from the Aaron Rodgers era. They have a lot of young talent on that team. They're a young team. They're only going to get better. The division is going to be right there for them. Detroit is no juggernaut by any stretch of imagination. Good team, but Detroit, they don't like. I would take Jordan Love over Jared Goff in a heartbeat. So you already have the best quarterback in the division, to me, and they. I give them a lot of credit because it could have went south. It could have went left quickly with Aaron Rodgers leaving and how that went down. And by the way, Aaron Rodgers absolutely did them a favor in a sense. To be honest with you, now we can pour into this young quarterback who's a budding star. His first full season, throws 32 touchdown passes and wins a playoff game in his first full season. A more successful first full season than Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers was good in his first full season as starting quarterback, but the team did not make the playoffs. Now, in all fairness, there was no number 7 seed as well as, this Green Bay team probably wouldn't have made the playoffs then if under the old format. So I got to be fair about that. But they have their quarterback, and all they have to do is just continue to develop talent, and they will be in the Super Bowl conversation next year without question. We'll go back now to all the thoughts. The Buffalo Bills, of course, were able to get by Pittsburgh 31 to 17 in a game that should not have been as hard. A game that wasn't as close as the score indicated. I know Pittsburgh cut the margin to 7, but you never got the sense that Pittsburgh was ever going to win this game. This was the best of Josh Allen that we saw a couple years ago. This was the Josh Allen that we saw that has finished top 3 in the MVP race a couple of times. 4 touchdowns, including that electrifying 52-yard run. Perfect balance, 34 runs, 30 passes. They even had a bunch of rushing yards, minus the Josh Allen rushing yards, which I always look at because I always use that to gauge the physicality of Buffalo. Are they intentionally trying to run the football? They were. They stayed away from the turnovers. Josh Allen did. Again, the only reason this game was close, they took their foot off the gas a little bit late in the game. Pittsburgh made a couple plays, but otherwise, this was for the most part, dominant performance for Buffalo over Pittsburgh, as it should have been. They were clearly a better team than Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh fought, but Pittsburgh just doesn't have enough. Don't have a quarterback for that matter, and it sets up another matchup with right now the best rivalry in football because they've met so many times in the playoffs. Kansas City and Buffalo, and they will meet this time. They will meet this time in Orchard Park in Buffalo. This is a game, and I'll preview this game right here, right now. This is a game that if you're the Buffalo Bills, you absolutely have to win. You absolutely have to win this game. You are catching Kansas City. This is the worst version of Kansas City that we've seen in the Mahomes, Andy Reid era. Okay, they are not a very good offensive team. They are excellent defensively. They have some players on defense. We know Spagnuolo. They've been great this year defensively. They've been carried by their defense. But Buffalo is a better team than Kansas City right now. They are, and with home field advantage, this could be a organizational defining game for that organization moving forward. Because you lose this game, all those happy feelings about the 6-game winning streak and the saving your season and fighting off adversity throughout the regular season when you were 6-6, all that to me goes out the window if you lose this game. Because again, this is a version of a Kansas City. This Kansas City team is not very good. They're dangerous. They're always dangerous with Mahomes, but they're not very. They are not very good. This is not a championship Kansas City caliber team. They're not. There's a reason why they're playing on the road for the first time in the Mahomes Andy Reid era. Okay, this is a game, where you handle your business if you're the Buffalo Bills. Again, this will be a very close game, highly competitive. I'm looking forward to it. They played a close game earlier this season with Buffalo. Was in the midst of their turnaround, and they took out Kansas City. I think it was 20-17. So it's not, again, if you're Buffalo, it's not like you haven't had success beating Kansas City. You've beat Kansas City in the regular season a few times. The problem has been in the postseason. So, they lost home in 21 and in 20 and 21. In 20, of course, that in the AFC Championship game, which they weren't ready. In 21, of course, that classic overtime game, 42-36. 42-36. So this will be the third time in 4 years that they meet. They know each other up and down. There's no, they've met, how many times between, their fourth playoff game. This is the ninth time they've met in the last 4 years. They played twice in 2020. They played twice in 21. So that's 4. 22, they played once. 5, 6. So 7 times basically in 4 years they've met. This will be their 7th meeting in the last 4 years. So these teams know each other extremely well. Again, Buffalo they have to win this game. And to me, it's going to come down, number one, can they run the ball effectively? And 2, can Josh Allen stay away from the big mistake? Because Kansas City's defense is for real. They are a very good defense. They have a top 5. They were one of the top 5 defenses that I saw all season long. That defense, they can get you with the pass rush. They have excellent. Their cornerbacks McDuffie's is an all-pro. On all 3 levels, they are very good defensively. Spagnuolo, we know what he's done over the course of his career, especially in these playoff moments. So it's Buffalo's again, and I would say right now, to be honest with you, I think Mahomes. We know Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league, but you're not like you would take Mahomes over Allen in this particular game, but it's not. They don't have a big edge. There's a small edge in quarterbacking. You're not giving that. Normally, Mahomes would be head and shoulders above the opposing quarterback. Not in this game. Allen can look Mahomes head toe to toe when he's playing when he's on the top of his game. Allen could be as good as any quarterback in the league when he's on top of his game. So I'm looking forward to this. Again, if you can't beat Kansas City now, if you're Buffalo, you'll never be able to beat them. And if you lose this game, it'd be hard. I wouldn't fire McDermott. I think I'm not going to discount the job he's done to turn that season around, considering what we just watched in Philadelphia. So we shouldn't the culture is solid in Buffalo, and we shouldn't dismiss the turnaround that they had, considering what transpired in Dallas and considering what transpired in Philadelphia, what's transpiring right now in Philadelphia. But they would have to have a hard look at that organization internally if they were to lose this game to Kansas City. Now, you lose to Baltimore or losing the Super Bowl, that's one thing. You can live with that somewhat. But you lose to this version of the Kansas City Chiefs, that cannot happen if you're the Buffalo Bills come on Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening. The deep dive, we've been talking a lot about culture so far in this program, so far in this podcast, and it is weird. It was prevalent this weekend in the NFL with these cultures, with the importance of culture. We know culture in not only sports, culture in any organization. How important it is, workplace or what have you. But you look at the NFL right now, and you look at the top cultures. I would say Kansas City, Baltimore, San Francisco, Green Bay, Buffalo, the Rams. Cincinnati's up there. I would have said Philadelphia, but I can't put Philadelphia up there anymore. I'm sorry. Right now, they're a shit show, and we'll get into that. We'll get into that later on in the program, in the podcast. But it's more important now, even in the NFL, it's more important now for your culture to be intact than it's ever been. Than it's ever been. Thinking back to those Dallas Cowboy teams of the '90s, you look back. I think you probably have to give Jimmy Johnson more credit for being one of the all-time great coaches than what we are willing to give him, even despite having us 2 Super Bowls. Because that coach, looking back now, that culture wasn't the greatest. Some of the stuff that was going on off the field with that team, some stuff he had to deal with, and then dealing with Jerry Jones. Now, some of the stuff Jimmy did to himself, because some of the players that he drafted, he took talent over character. Let's be honest. Like Jimmy Johnson, you could be, if you couldn't play, I don't care if you were, feeding the homeless in church 7 days a week. He wanted players. His whole thing was, let me get the best coordinators, let me get the best players, and I will delegate and empower those people to do their jobs, and we'll let the chips fall where they may be. And it worked. It got 3 Super Bowls in 4 years, including back-to-back. But now, with the salary cap being as it is, the parity, the television money being split, your culture has to be, you have to have a legitimately solid culture, because in the NFL, there are going to be injuries. You're going to have adversity over the course of the season. Cleveland went through how many quarterbacks? 4 quarterbacks this year. Okay. Things are going to happen. Question is, can your culture survive it? We saw Cleveland survive, and despite the loss to Houston, that was more about C.J. Stroud than anything. Despite that loss, Cleveland had a great year. They went through 4 quarterbacks and still made the playoffs in the toughest division in football. Cincinnati, their culture survived Joe Burrow being injured, missing the last part of the season, and they almost made the playoffs. They went 9-8. I mean, that's a great season for Cincinnati, all things considered, to be honest with you. Their culture survived that. They didn't fall apart. And we'll get to Philly, but what happened to Dallas? What happened to, again, we can look at a number of teams. What's going on with Tennessee right now? We'll talk more about that later on. Clearly, Mike Vrabel is not feeling their culture, feeling that culture. It might be time for Pittsburgh to adjust this culture. Not saying they have a bad culture, but they might want to be, moving to the 21st century as far as their culture goes. Maybe that Pittsburgh way needs to be tweaked a little bit and updated. We'll talk about Tomlin later on in the program as well. And again, I put Jerry Jones a reason. Money doesn't buy culture. The Dallas Cowboys are the most valuable franchise in all the sports. I'm not counting the soccer teams, Man City and those teams with soccer. I'm talking about in the 4 major sports, the Dallas Cowboys are the most valuable sports franchise. It means nothing when it comes to the product on the field. It doesn't. It doesn't. And again, if your culture is jacked, it's going to get exposed. It's going to come out. We saw this last year with the Philadelphia 76ers in the playoffs. Despite all that talent, we know the culture was toxic, lack of leadership, accountability, and what happened in the playoffs. They got eliminated as usual in the conference semifinals in a series that, frankly, they probably should have won. But again, if I'm thinking about, let's say I'm putting myself in a position, I'm an owner, right? and I'm interviewing a coach, yeah, I want to win games, of course. Also, one of my main questions would be to the coach, like, what is your belief in what does a culture look like to you? What does a great culture look like to you? How are you going to set up our franchise for success, even when you say, even if you're retired or move or let's say move past us. Like we want to be set up for success even after you're gone. Like I want to learn from you as a coach how to instill this culture. Yeah, but again, most owners, a lot of these owners don't have or don't their egos are too big to ask those type of questions to the coach. They are. But it's more. I'm telling you right now, culture is more important than ever. And what you're seeing in the NFL and the NBA is, people complain in the NBA about player empowerment. The reason why there's been so much player empowerment within the organization is because you have shitty cultures. So if I'm a top player in this league, all-star, all-NBA caliber player, and your culture is shitty, of course I feel like I'm gonna feel like I can do whatever the hell I want. And why should I feel this way, considering that there's no accountability? There's no leader. If up top is ran, if there's no leader, if the leadership is horrible up top, why should I, as a top player, not want to do whatever I want to do, or not want the organization run how I feel like it should be run? The Miami Heat have a culture. That Heat culture, that's real. It goes from Pat Riley to Eric Spoelstra, and it filters all the way down to the players. That's why they can go. That's why you've seen some of the teams that haven't been as talented make it to the NBA Finals. That team last year had no business making it to the NBA Finals. None. They weren't good as Milwaukee. They weren't good as Boston or Philadelphia. Not even close. They have some talent. Jimmy Butler has been a top 10 player in the playoffs. He turns into a top 10 player. But that team wasn't. That team had no business making it to the finals. They have a great coach, but more importantly, they have a great culture. Versus what happened to Philadelphia, or versus the example I used earlier in the podcast, what happened to the Phoenix Suns basically a year after going to the finals. And it can fall apart fast. A culture can fall apart fast. We'll talk about that later on with what's going on in Philadelphia. But if your culture is not up to par, you have no chance. You have no chance. Look at the teams playing in the playoffs remaining. Okay, Green Bay, they've survived the Aaron Rodgers, all that. They've survived Aaron Rodgers. They're playing in the divisional playoffs right now. Aaron Rodgers is sitting at home. Houston, one player has completely shifted their culture. They've drafted well in the last couple of years. They're set up nicely. They have an excellent coach. The owner has backed off enough to allow football people to do their job. They are set up nicely for the near future. Baltimore goes without saying. Baltimore from Ozzie Newsome on to their current people. There's a standard that they have. They is one of, if not maybe the best culture in all of football, along with Kansas City. Kansas City, San Francisco speaks for itself. The Rams, who just got eliminated, had a great year this year. There was no way that the Rams were supposed to be as good as they were, considering the talent they had lost. And so they, to me, overachieved. And when you have a great culture, you might have years where you do overachieve. So when you ask a question, when you have the question, why you see what happened, why you see what happened in a Game 7 Phoenix Dallas, or why you see what happened with the Dallas Cowboys, normally the answer is probably going to be the coach is some shit. It's probably going to be that simple. Just go look at the culture of the franchise. Game of the week, Detroit and the Rams. Talking about the aforementioned Rams. This game, very strange game, in a sense that you had all field goals in the second half. It was on pace. It seemingly like it was going to be an offensive, like a shootout. Defense is kind of tight. Both defenses tightened up in the second half. The thing I walk away from this game, and the Detroit's a little bit better, so they absolutely should have won. Matthew Stafford had it. Matthew Stafford has taken a lot of heat over the course of his career. Even winning a Super Bowl, people say, well, that was a ready-made team, a bunch of talent, whatever. The point is they didn't win it before he got there, in terms of with Jared Goff. So, so I think people have to back off of Matthew Stafford a little bit. But this to me was as good of a performance as I've ever seen from Matthew Stafford, to be honest with you. All things considering, it was in the playoffs, even in defeat. He was spectacular. They kicked the shit out of Matthew Stafford in this game. At one point, you thought he was concussed. He was taking all types of hits. He goes 25 for 36, 367, no turnovers. They couldn't run the ball really effectively. They only had 68 yards total rushing, but he was spectacular. I give him a ton of credit. We know Puka Nacua is a stud. He is. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe Cooper Kupp obviously didn't have the year that we're normally accustomed to seeing him have, but Nuka is clearly their number one guy right now. But Detroit did what they had to do to win this game. They know how to win. They've won a few close games this year. First playoff win in Detroit going back to the Barry Sanders, Eric Kramer era in 1991. Matter of fact, their last playoff win was against I think 92 was their last playoff win. It was 91 or 92. I think it was 92. I think it was the 91 season, actually. Since their last playoff win. I'm going to look that up right now. But it's been a long time for the Detroit Lions. And again, we're getting back to what we've been discussing as far as culture. Dan Campbell completely shifted the culture of that team. Now, I remember, you got to give credit where credit's due with Campbell, because the ankle biting and all that weird stuff that we heard in the press conference a couple of years back, saying to yourself, this is not going to last. I've been dead wrong, and a lot of people have been dead wrong in regards to Dan Campbell. But that team is tough. That team, their defense has improved, to say the least. They go into, next week, they absolutely will, they absolutely have a tremendous chance and they frankly should defeat take out the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at home and have an excellent chance to get to their first conference finals since 1991. The last playoff win. Yeah, their last playoff win was 1991 against the Dallas Cowboys. Yeah, I think that was 34-3. They had their way with Dallas, that particular, and then of course lost to Washington. So you're talking, 30 plus years, 32 years. It's a long time coming. The Wayne Fonts, Eric Kramer, Barry Sanders, that team. They destroyed Dallas that year, 38-6. That was the year before Dallas went on to win the Super Bowl the following year. So you give Detroit a lot of credit. The Rams, should be in the mix next year with the right moves and right drafting. They have some young talent, especially on defense. They have a number, some nice pieces on their defense, along still with having a great Aaron Donald, who was again first team All Pro this year, even though he was took a small step back. But when you go, a small step back for him is going from being arguably the best player in football, minus the quarterbacks, to just a regular first team All Pro player. So he still is a top player in this league, and the Rams should be, without question, probably right now the number one challenger to San Francisco next year in that division. Should challenge, possibly be one of the contenders in the NFC. But you'll have the Lions moving on to face the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And remember this: listen, out of all the quarterbacks remaining, Mahomes has won 2 Super Bowls, of course. Jared Goff has a Super Bowl appearance, so he is on that short list of the quarterbacks remaining who have been through some of the playoff wars and have actually been to a Super Bowl. So the moments should not be too big for one Jared Goff moving forward. Biggest disappointment. This was easy. No, it actually wasn't easy because you could have went Dallas, but as much as I have to put Philadelphia has to be the biggest disappointment. I'm gonna tell you why over Dallas. Number one, we expected Dallas to at one point, whether it was going to be this week or next week, you expected Dallas to collapse. This Philadelphia collapse has been something that we've never seen in NFL history. Philadelphia at one point was 10-1 in this season, right? Earlier in the season on this very podcast, I discussed this historic stretch historic run Philadelphia was on going back to last season. They were 20 at one point. They were on a 25-4 run. They were 25-4 over the last on November 26th when they won that game to go 10-1. They beat Buffalo in that overtime game, a game Buffalo should have won, and I think helped turn around Buffalo's season. They were on a stretch where they were 25-4, where that you're talking about amongst the great teams of all times in terms of having that run, that stretch like that, in terms of that with their record. To go from that to what it looks like, what it's looking like now, is something that I don't like. You see a lot of things in sports. This is something that I never would have, in a million years, would have ever predicted that could happen. Again, there's low-hanging fruit to talk about, hey, the defense was bad. Yeah, defense was bad all year long. Yes, they didn't run the ball as well as they did last year. That's it. You lose, first of all, you lose a game. They had the embarrassing loss to Arizona at home, where Arizona did whatever they wanted to do offensively. Okay, we know how bad Arizona was this year as a whole, and defensively and offensively in particular. You have a Tampa Bay team that did whatever they wanted to do in that game last night. And, Philadelphia had, again, no answers. There was no answers they had no answers for a Tampa Bay team that barely got into the playoffs. They only won that division based off the fact that it was one of the worst divisions in all of football, which the NFC South was one of the worst divisions in all football. And now we understand why this happened, because there is serious internal strife within that organization between Jalen Hurts, Nick Sirianni, Brian Johnson, the players in that locker room. They're like, Jalen Hurts said, we have a lack of an identity. That is a square shot to me at the coaching staff, at Nick Sirianni. The guy who sets the tone for the locker room from that standpoint and sets the identity of that team is the head coach. But the problem is you have people above him who are making football moves for him. Henceforth, reassigning his defensive coordinator after, really panicking after a blowout loss to the San Francisco 49ers. or the Dallas Cowboys. It was one of those two games. One of those games that that the side got reassigned. And listen, as far as Sirianni goes, I don't like. Listen, I think Sirianni is a good coach. I don't think he's great. And based on merit, based on his record, he shouldn't be fired. But if you don't trust Sirianni to know, you know, to hire the right assistant coaches, then why is he shouldn't be coaching your team? Like, you shouldn't want a puppet coaching your football team. That's what I'm talking about, broken coaching. Like, I want a guy who has confidence in his assistants. I want to be able to trust that you as a head coach can pick the right assistant coaches. If I don't have that trust in you, you're not coaching my football team. And now you're hearing, that Jeffrey Lurie is a meddlesome owner because he wants to believe in this analytics, which is I heard that word a lot this weekend in various circles in regards to the NFL, which is scary if you're an NFL fan because analytics is just seemingly not for just analytics is fine. You want to use analytics, there's no problem with that, but what it does give a owner an entry point into thinking, into meddling into football, making football moves and decisions that he should not be that should be made by your team president or your general manager or your head coach. So it gives an owner, it's like a toy for an owner in a sense. So Jeffrey Lurie has seemingly turned into a guy who, maybe not at the level as far as Jerry Jones, meddlesome, but approaching that, which is not good for that organization. And again, Jalen Hurts took a step back this year. There's no two ways about it. I know he had a number of rushing touchdowns, but as a passer, he took a major step back. Lamar Jackson took a major step forward. Jalen Hurts took a major step back in regards to those two young talented quarterbacks. And it begs the question, who are the Philadelphia Eagles? Are they the team? Because when you look at their last 4 years, right? Let me pull this up right now. Philadelphia, their last 4 years. Going back to let's go to the 2020 season. They were 4-11. That was the last year. Peterson, of course, that was Peterson's last year. He didn't even make it through the season. 4-11-1 with Peterson before Peterson got fired. 2021, they're 9-8, lost in the wild card to Tampa Bay. Of course, last year they go to the Super Bowl, almost win the Super Bowl 14-3. This year they had one of the great in-season collapses in NFL history at 11-6. So who are they? Because 3 of these 4 years, they've been bad. They've been bad. Even with the fact that they've made the playoffs 3 straight years. Are they closer to the 9-8 team? They're not a 4-11 team. We know that. But are they that much better than? Are they that much better than 9-8, 11-6, somewhere in between there? They're certainly not the 14-3 team that we saw last year. They're not that team. It's seemingly that they're not that team right now. And again, Hurts's contract, right, as these years go by, his contract is only going to eat up that much more the salary cap, which means that you're going to lose more talent and be dependent on him to, compensate for the loss of that talent, because that's what happens when you pay Jalen Hurts franchise quarterback money, and all these Cincinnati's going to have to go through this. All these franchises, Kansas City, all these franchises that pay these quarterbacks that type of money will have to go through this at some point, losing a lot of talent. We saw Kansas City struggle with it this year, losing the amount of talent that they have because their quarterback is eating up a lot of their salary cap. And looking at Hurts's contract, Hurts versus cap hit in 2024 actually was not that bad. It was actually not that, to be honest with you. They're still in good shape when it comes. They actually do a great job at negotiating a contract, because his cap hit next year is only $13 million. That's not in 2024, 2025, 21, 26, 31. So they actually have a couple of years before he starts really eating to their salary cap. They actually, so from that standpoint, they did a great job in terms of negotiating that contract, which should allow them to put more talent around him. But even with that being said, he still is going to have to develop for this franchise to go to the next, for this franchise to return to where they were at last year. Last year, I thought he took a step forward in terms of his passing within the pocket. Again, this year he took a major step back. And it seems like he is not happy about the direction of the offense and the direction of the team that the team is not going is going into. That the team is going, I should say. And didn't give the greatest ringing endorsement to Nick Sirianni, to be honest with you, in that press conference. They have a lot of questions. Kelce retires. It's a major law. I mean, the guy's going to be, he's a Hall of Fame tight end. I mean, he's a Hall of Fame center, one of the best centers of this generation. So that's a major loss. But the defense needs to be completely revamped. Their defense was awful this year. They were literally one of the worst defenses in the league this year. And down the stretch, they were the worst defense in football. So they're worse. I think they're worse. I think their collapse is worse, or what's going on with them is even worse than the Cowboys, to be honest with you. I really do. I mean, at least with the Cowboys, everybody know who's calling the shots. It's Jerry. It's not a good thing, but everybody kind of knows how, who's the guy from that standpoint. With the Eagles, Lurie's the owner, but there are too many voices, there's the leadership in that locker room is mind-boggling to say. It's mind-boggling to me because, you have a number of strong personalities, some guys who could have a chance to be future Hall of Famers in that locker room, some guys who were considered to be respected, with Kelce, Fletcher Cox, Graham, that core four. It just goes to show you it doesn't matter the leadership in the locker room if your front office is in shambles. And I'm telling you right now, Howie Roseman, I don't see how if you do get rid of Sirianni, I don't see how you would keep Howie Roseman if I'm Jeffrey Lurie. Like, how many coaches has he would he have gone through? To be honest, post Andy Reid, you're talking what, Chip Kelly? We're talking Chip Kelly, Nick Sirianni, Doug Peterson. Would this be his fourth or fifth coach? So I don't see it, and he's not going to lose his job. So that is like I said, that is a shit show dumpster fire right now in Philadelphia, and it happened. It comes at the worst time because if I'm a Bill Belichick, if I'm a Jim Harbaugh, I'm looking at that. I'm saying, can I fix this? I'm not dealing with a meddlesome owner. I'm not dealing with a meddlesome owner in regards to Jeffrey Lurie. I thought you were the anti Jerry Jones, but if I come to find out that you're more like Jerry Jones, I'm good. And that coach might not even want full control, but I don't want Jeffrey Lurie, and I don't want to hear about Jeffrey Lurie and his analytics department. I'm sorry if I'm a prospective coach. So they've taken some of the luster off that job for sure. I would have told you this time last week, I would have said that would be the number one job for a Harbaugh. Well, number two, but because I still say the Chargers are number one because of Herbert. But that I'd rather be perfectly honest with you. I probably would still, because it hurts. Atlanta doesn't have a quarterback. I know Belichick interview with Atlanta. They're, like, the quarterback situation, I still look at the quarterback situation, still say Hurts is a better option than what Atlanta has or what the Commanders have or what some of these other job openings have, to be perfectly honest with you. But it's not, the luster has definitely been taken off in the last week with what transpired, with what has transpired with this organization. There's no two ways about it. We won the week, Baker Mayfield. And I never thought that I would say those two words in terms of who won the week. But Baker Mayfield, you gotta give him all the credit in the world. Mayfield, I didn't even think that he would be. This was a guy that before the season it was a question of whether he would be even a starting quarterback. We knew that he would get a shot, but they win a division. He had an excellent year. He, believe it or not, has a winning playoff record, 2-1 playoff record, 7 touchdowns, 1 interception. The only loss was against Kansas City. Okay. A couple years ago, in 2020, 3 years ago. So you gotta give him a lot of credit. I've never been a Baker Mayfield fan by any stretch of imagination. We know he's not great, but he played his ass off this year. And they're playing in the divisional round. So Baker Mayfield, and he outplayed Jalen Hurts by a mile in that game. It wasn't even close. So he gets he won the week. Divisional playoffs should be a great set of games. We already talked about the Kansas City Buffalo meeting again, but you're talking about the future, and the future is now in regards to these quarterbacks. Between Lamar Jackson, C.J. Stroud, Brock Purdy, Jordan Love, a number of young, talented quarterbacks. That is a great doubleheader. Now that'll be an interesting doubleheader on Saturday with the Texans Ravens. The Ravens absolutely should win that game. Again, we talk about pressure. There's no team with more pressure on them, no player with more pressure on them right now than the Baltimore Ravens, than Lamar Jackson. If you're Lamar Jackson, you're coming off your best season of your career. You have one of the best teams, if not the best team in football, based on what happened in the regular season against San Francisco, the best team in football, considering how dominant the dominant performance they had against them. You win this game and you win it going away. Period. You win it going away. Texans don't really belong on the same field as the Ravens. If CJ Stroud is able to go into that stadium and win a road game and go to the conference championship his first year, that will just add to this. That will add to a legend, to already what's been, to me, the best rookie season by any quarterback in NFL history. And we'll start talking about him. Is he going to do what Joe Burrow did a couple years ago and just take a team to the Super Bowl and possibly win it? Those conversations will start to happen if he's able to do this. But I expect the Ravens to be able to handle the Texans. But again, it's hard to bet against the way C.J. Stroud is playing. That team has a little mojo, some magic to them right now. They will go in there. Houston can go in there. They will be as loose as loose can be. They can go in there. They can play free. There's no pressure. And I mean no pressure on Houston in that game. They've already accomplished. They've far exceeded expectations. All the pressure's on Baltimore from that standpoint. Packers 49ers, I think that will be a reality check for the Packers. The 49ers physically are just too physical for the Packers. I don't think the Packers will be able to run the ball. They will be able to, Jordan Love can make some plays, because if you're going to do something against 49ers, it's going to be against that secondary. Secondary is not great. So you can make some plays that can be made against that secondary. But I just think physically, the 49ers will stop the run and be able to run against the Packers. I frankly expect the Packers to win the 49ers to win going away. And of course, Buccaneers Lions, should be a solid game. I don't think the Buccaneers are any good. The Buccaneers have a very good defense, but the Lions from top to bottom are clearly better at home. I I expect the Lions to win this game. I think it'll be a close game, but I fully expect the Lions to win this game, and would be somewhat surprised if they don't come out on top. And of course, the weekend is capped off by Chiefs Bills. This is borderline a toss. This is basically a toss up. Man, Bills should win. They should win. But man, I'm like, Mahomes is the type. There's been a lot of talk about Mahomes never having to play a role playoff game and having basically, all his games at either home or neutral site. Neutral sites, of course, being the Super Bowl. Mahomes is so competitive. If Mahomes goes out there, throws 4 touchdowns and 375 yards, it would not surprise me, considering how competitive he is. I'm gonna go towards. I think the Bills will win a close game, maybe an overtime game. But man, I'm very nervous about that pick. I'm very nervous. Very. I thought the Bills would get to the conference championship. I'm extremely nervous about that pick. To be perfectly honest with you, it's hard to pick against Mahomes. Hard to pick against Mahomes. It really is. But I think that Kansas City this year is just not quite up to par. I know. I know Kansas City is not what they once were, what they have been in the Andy Reid Mahomes era, and I think that game will be close. All their games are close. These two teams play for the most part, and I believe that Allen will be able to make one play enough. I think the difference is going to be the running game of Buffalo. I do think that Buffalo. I think I'll be watching out. I'll be watching with Buffalo. Will they stick with the running game? And Kansas City's offense, even last week against Miami, their offense wasn't good. So they kicked a bunch of field goals. So their offense is still not, again, close to where it once was, to where we're accustomed to seeing it. This is a game with your Buffalo. You have to run the ball anywhere from 34 to 40 times. You have to. And this has to be a Josh Allen game. It just does. Because I know what Mahomes is going to bring in these type of games. The bigger the game, the better he plays. Real thoughts, of course. Mike Tomlin says he's going to be back in Pittsburgh. I know there's a lot of people in Pittsburgh that are angry or not happy about that. A few people that are not happy about that. Keep this in mind. Here's the thing. I'm not even saying they're all the way wrong. First of all, based on record, there's no way you could fire Mike Tomlin based off his record. That team, he hasn't had a losing season in 17 years. It's not Mike Tomlin's fault that he doesn't have a quarterback. Now, I heard some Pittsburgh people say, well, he wasn't able to see that Mason Rudolph was his best quarterback. How far do you think you were going with Mason Rudolph? Like, seriously. What are we talking about here? Mason Rudolph. There does come a time, though, when you could be at a place for too long. Bill Parcells and Pat Riley both said, basically, like, the 10-year rule. Once a coach gets past 10 years, you don't borrow time. That is the perfect amount of time to be at one place before you move on. And listen, I'm not saying that Tomlin should be fired. What I'm saying is it might be time for him. It might be in not only his best interest, but in the best interest of the organization if he were to move on. Now, clearly, based off what he said, this is not going to happen. But I would say it would not be the worst thing if he had chosen to move on, because I think that 17 years is a long time. It's a long, long time. And the one thing about Pittsburgh, besides needing a quarterback, they need to kind of modernize how they're doing things. I think, it sounds great the Pittsburgh way. The standard is the standard. But, if you're not, it's a saying, adapt or die. And if you're not evolving or progressive in the NFL, then you're going to be stuck. And right now they're stuck in the middle. Like, they're good enough to barely make the playoffs, but they haven't won a playoff game in 7 years. and they've been embarrassed in their last 5 playoff losses. So these are things that have to be looked at and can't be ignored. That's all there is to it. But again, I'm not saying Mike Tomlin should be fired. Not saying that, but they have to, again, they need, in terms of their culture, maybe just tweak the culture, maybe, or update the culture. As far as interviews for coaching, we talk, Belichick interview with Atlanta. Listen, I'll stick to what I believe. Belichick will go whoever gives him close to full power. That's where he's going. So it may not be the best job as far as in terms of winning. Whoever gives Bill Belichick close to total power, that's where he's going to end up. Harbaugh interviewed with the Chargers. Harbaugh is apparently trying to buy the state of Michigan, and I'll explain that on the next podcast. I want to deep dive that situation about some of the contract things that he's trying to get put in his Michigan contract, which is fascinating and it's crazy. But we'll talk about that later. So we'll see what happens with him. Gino Auriemma came out and basically is whining about not being able to build solid relationships with his players, because instead of most of the players being there for 4 years, they're only there for 1 year. And here's the bottom line. Like, Gino, we never heard this when Connecticut was on top. And there was a point where Connecticut was not only on top, there was Connecticut and the rest of college basketball. Like, they were so by far the best college basketball program that it wasn't even close. Like, we're talking about a guy who's won 11 national championships and has had a handful of undefeated seasons. Now they find themselves just another great program. Like, they're a top 10 team, and they can make it to an Elite Eight or a Final Four, but they are no longer that it program. And Gino Auriemma cannot handle that. He cannot. A lot of these coaches cannot handle the players being as popular as they are. A lot of these coaches cannot handle players being able to do what they've been doing, and that's leave when they want to. So it goes beyond just NIL. This is talking about the transfer portal. This is talking about just player empowerment. This is talking about players being as important to the school as the coach. Remember, there was a time where North Carolina basketball, you thought about North Carolina basketball, you thought about Dean Smith. You thought about Indiana basketball, you thought about Bob Knight. You thought about UCLA, you thought about John Wood, and so on and so on. Woody Hayes, Ohio State. That day is done. The coach, the player, is the one that is setting that people look at, because they're on because of the social media era, because of just it's a different world. And Saban is gone. You've heard Lane Kiffin complain about it. You've heard a number of other coaches complain about it. I don't believe that's why Coach K retired. I believe Coach K was coaching forever, and it was time for Coach K to go. So he actually evolved over the course of 40 plus years, and that's why he went out, with a Final Four appearance, making it to the Final Four. So I don't put him in that same brass of people that I heard complaining about the current situation. But you heard rumbling again. Nick Saban, Roy Williams, heard rumblings about him not being happy with the direction of college sports. So this old guard, they're on their way. They're on their way out. And if you cannot evolve with the times of this current system, NIL, transfer portal, then there's no place for you in college sports. It's just not. Or you're just gonna be completely just frustrated. So I will see how long Gino Auriemma lasts, or how long he coaches. The way it sounds, maybe 2 more years, maybe this year, maybe next year. Would it shock me if he retired after this year? No. Be perfectly honest with you, it would not. That's going to wrap it up for this latest edition of the Real Deal Podcast. This podcast will be up by tomorrow. Have a great rest of the evening. I'm out.